web payments community group at the World Wide Web Consortium for a number of years now. So the technical work that we've done to date has been mostly proof of concept stuff. And what we're trying to do now is share that technology with a larger audience, a multi-stakeholder audience. So last year at the 2013 IGF, we started talking about taxation of virtual goods and payments and how we basically route money over the internet. And we took the input from that, took it into last year's W3C technical plenary, and the outcome from that was the world's first web payments workshop. So this is a demonstration that this multi-stakeholder approach that we have here at the IGF feeds into other technical groups, which then create, exploratory groups in the technical world, and what we find out in those exploratory groups, we feed back into the IGF, creating this kind of nice virtuous cycle of feedback between the technology, people that are creating the technology, and the people that do policy and regulation around the technology. So we have a set of technologies around web payments. It touches quite a bit on identity, on privacy, on digital receipts, on payment initiation. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to build payments into the core architecture of the web, the core architecture of the internet. Right? So there's a lot of responsibility placed on the groups and organizations that are building this technology to ensure that we do not create something that violates people's privacy, that we do not create something that makes it very easy to launder money, and just create something that is of benefit to the world at large. For those of you that don't know the World Wide Web Consortium, they create many of the technology standards that you use every day. If you open a web browser, you're using their technology. In fact, 2.4 billion people around the world use the technical standards that this group creates. So it's very important that we get this technology right. So what we're going to try to do today, Pindar is going to go into the exercise here, but we don't want this to be a panel audience interaction. We want to get as much feedback from the IGF community to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Thanks, Pindar.
So at this moment, I will move into, we're going to reorganize the stage. If I can ask everyone but Malcolm to leave the stage, and your seats are assigned. We're just going to get set up for the workshop. Now, you heard Louise mention that in physical space, when we buy something, we have the metrics to understand a transaction. So I'm going to start, and this is a web payments transaction. Jeremy wrote an excellent book, which I will encourage you to read. It's actually also available online, called Multi-Stakeholder Governance at the Internet Governance Forum. How apt. Now, I'm going to buy this physical book from him. He is the vendor. So, hold this. Now, I'm just going to do what I think should be very strange to everyone, well, actually not, is to give him 100 Hong Kong dollars as the buyer. I give him something of value, and he gives me his book. Everyone's clear, right? So we're going to do that process by going through and explaining the web protocol. Now, I've seen his face before. In fact, the book introduced us. There's an identity issue. He sees me. I've given him a piece of paper with some red ink on it, Hong Kong dollars. I don't know if he can't spend it here in Istanbul. It turns out that you can't even change it at the money changers. So does he have actually anything of value? I don't know. But this is the kind of exchange that we have. But the issue to do is identity. There's no intermediary. However, if I use my credit card, HSBC credit card, or if I use my USD stick with Bitcoin, then what happens? These are the issues that we're trying to surface. Oh, sorry. I'm going to sell it back to you now. Thank you. Actually, we will need this for you. Keep this, and you keep this as a deposit, okay. And I'll give this, and you'll need to leave at some point. But thank you very much. So let me just try and set some context. This whole area of financial technology is hot. Okay. How many of you have a smartphone? Okay. Right. There are over 400. If you look at Angel.co, which is angellist.com. There are over 800 new startup companies investing their time, effort, and energy in mobile payments alone. And mobile payments, in some sense, is a subset of the issue. Why? Because all these mobile phones these days have access to the internet. Now, in the next 1.5 billion people to come online in Asia, in Africa, etc., they will also be probably accessing the internet itself for the first time through their smartphone. And so there's a lot of effort right now to bank the unbanked, people where they don't have any financial infrastructure. So there's huge social motivation to get this technology right. And so what we're trying to do here, we've only one objective, and that is for you today to ask questions. Every single question you ask, we will record, if anonymously if you wish, and we'll go through that. And the questions we've already posed on the website. And what we're hoping through this dialogue is that we generate some insight, that we don't replicate the problem with spam in the payments area. If the guys who designed the email protocol envisaged the problem of spam, what were you thinking at the time when you invented email? Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to avoid creating unintended consequences for this new technology, which is very different. It's the most different thing that probably the world has seen. I look at it as follows. The last 15 years we've been talking about telecom liberalization. Right, the internet. I believe this whole fintech area, financial technologies, the next 10 years is all going to be about financial liberalization. And so today we're going to illustrate some of the technology by grounding it in use cases, which explains how the technology works. And so if you give me a moment, we will set up the stage. Now, we mentioned anonymity. So for those of you who want to participate in anonymity and send their questions to us, there's an internet relay chat. Again, there's a third stage after this, which is the post-IGF online survey. Again, written submissions, and this is all going to be wrapped up and packaged for next month's technical plenary. Last but not least, there is a session evaluation form. So, let me explain how this role play is going to work. And after Manu sets up, I will need a wireless mic. We're going to explore this issue through role play. Just as Jeremy was the seller and I was the buyer, we're going to do exactly the same, okay? But we're going to start not in payments, we're going to start with web identity, because that's really the simple context to understand. And we're going to then ground the discussion with a specific web payment example, which I hope you can start to kick the tires and you identify, hey, that's not right. Let me give you an example. I think last week Nigeria introduced a new ID card. Has anyone heard of this? It is an ID card, it is a credit card, and it is a debit card. Now, in China, we have some technical innovation is great. We've got life insurance companies who want you to wear a device, and depending on how much you exercise, your premium goes up or down. Right. Your smartphones these days have various biometric sensors, right? Fingerprint, facial scan, voice print. These are ways that they can combine and form your identity. If these companies, or it's not clear who, will aggregate your payment data, if they can calculate, for example, if they know what I'm buying in the supermarket, they may know my total saturated fat intake. These are the unintended consequences. So in summary, we're trying to surface the unintended social consequences and political consequences from the technology. Why? Because we are not qualified. Well, I mean, we can think of all the different cases, but any technology has, as Norbert mentioned, unintended consequences. So with that, let's get going. I use this mic? Right. So let's, we have 3 parties instead of 2 in a typical web identity transaction. And the 3 parties, let me just explain how this is going to work. We have, all of you understand that to access the web you use a browser, right? Orange browser. Name me the orange browser. Chrome? Yeah, Chrome, Firefox, they're all browsers, okay? And we also have another party, which is the website that you're trying to buy from. So before, Malcolm was like the website and I was the browser. But with web identity, we have a new party, a third party, which was mentioned, which was the identity provider. Now, what Manu is going to do next is I'm going to give the mic to him, and he's going to explain through the use of specific test use cases how this flow is going to work. Now, we use use cases and technology to help focus our thinking, to be very specific and precise about exactly what we're talking about. Now, notwithstanding that, this is it's a greater conceptual simplification of the details. So Manu, can you please take us through the first example?
Sure, absolutely. So as Pindar said, we're going to start out very simple. This is how the technology is designed today. It's certainly not set in stone. The feedback that we get from this group is going to feed back into how we change the next iteration of the technology. So everyone probably had to buy a plane ticket to get here, right? And you gave over a number of pieces of information in the purchase of that plane ticket. You gave over some passport information, most likely, or some kind of name information. You gave over your email address so they could contact you. And maybe you could have also given them some visa information when you bought that plane ticket. So the idea here is that you were at a website buying the plane ticket, right? You used your browser to get there. You're now viewing the website. The way it works now is you have to enter in all this information. You have to do it for every single website, and we're trying to automate this process to make it much more easy and make it more verifiable, so that the information that you give the website is provable. They don't have to trust you. They can trust someone else. For example, a government. They can trust the government that the digital passport that you're giving them is in fact a valid passport. So using your browser, you go to the website. The website says, I need these credentials from you. I need an email address credential, I need a government-issued passport, and I need a visa. Because I just want to make sure that that you can get to the country that you need to, and you have a visa when you get there, right? So those are the three pieces of information that I need from you. Now, your browser is going to detect that the website has requested that information, and it's going to go back and go to your identity provider. Now, your identity provider is someone that you have picked previously. It's someone that you trust with your credential information. You trust them to store your digital passport. You trust them to keep that information safe and protected. And the identity provider basically has these credentials stored on there. So 3 credentials here, email address, passport, and visa stored here, right? Your browser is going to fetch these credentials and then deliver them back to the site that asked for them, right? It's going to give it to the website. Now that website, how does that website know whether or not those are valid credentials at all, right? Right now, we're depending on digital signatures on those credentials. So there's a cryptography component to this. But basically, once those credentials are delivered to the website can then verify that those credentials are, in fact, real. Right? It can check the signature. The signature is from, for example, the government of France or the United States government or the Canadian government, and it knows that those are valid credentials. It doesn't have to trust you. It trusts other parties for that digital signature. So at the most basic level, that's how we're envisioning this new identity mechanism working. This is how you're going to be able to prove who you are on the web.
Have we lost everyone? Any questions at this point? 1 second. Name, rank, and serial number.
Thank you, Pinder. My name's Peter Musferiadis, and I'm from Australia. I'm just trying to understand, let's say I just go into an internet cafe now, and I go to the website, how does it link up with the identity provider? Do I have to put in a serial or code? I'm a bit lost.
Right. So we're going to try not to delve too deeply into the technical but your browser is capable of sending out a query to the general internet. Right, and this query is a distributed query. It can find your identity provider. I'm going to wave my hands and say that it's a protocol called telehash. It's a new protocol, but one of the capabilities of that protocol is that you've gone into an internet cafe. That computer knows absolutely nothing about you, and using only your email address, you type in your email address into the browser, it can create a query that goes out to the internet and discovers who your identity provider is. Now, that identity provider might be in the US, it might be in Canada. The telehash protocol is in fact so sophisticated that you could be wearing your identity provider around your wrist. On a smartwatch, it could be in your cell phone, and it will find that identity provider and request the credentials from that identity provider. Did that answer your question, or is it?
I have a few more questions.
Okay.
That might be answered.
Questions are good. That's why we're here.
All right.
Over to you, sir.
How is different the identity provider to the certification entity of the electronic signature?
Right. So it's very important to keep the identity provider completely separate from the organizations that are creating the digital certificates or the digital signatures on these credentials. Right. So, for example, if you wanted to run your own identity provider, let's say that you had a home internet server and you wanted to run your own identity provider on that, who's going to trust that identity provider, right? Google's not going to trust them, Facebook's not going to trust them, PayPal's not going to trust them. So you need some third party to issue a credential to you that's trustworthy. This is just a storage space for your credentials, right? The trust comes from a third party. And so, for example, more than likely, a website is going to trust, for example, the Belgian government over you. Right, so if they see a digital signature from the Belgian government, they'll trust that more likely over just you. But it really is up to the website on who they trust.
So let's try and illustrate that. Which country are you from? Ecuador. So you're the Ecuadorian government, and I've come and I've proved myself I was born in Ecuador. Can you please sign this with your signature? It's like a magic trick, okay? Again, his signature is specific to yourself. It's got nothing to do with the identity provider. But somehow, if it ends up here, this website says, oh, I know that this signature is from the Ecuadorian government. I can check it with the Ecuadorian government. I go with you. Is this your signature? Yes. Okay. I believe you. And it can do so through all the different credentials. Now, right now, we're talking at the identity, from the web identity perspective. Are there any other questions here? Because we can move on now to a payment example to really surface the intricacies between privacy and policing. If there are no other questions, Monica, can I move on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to do a bit of magic here. The website changes and becomes the seller, the merchant, if you will. The browser stays the same, right? And instead of an identity provider, the same role is played by the payment processor. So Manu, can you take us again through this process?
Sure. So the general, what we're trying to demonstrate here is that this same flow works for proving your identity, and the exact same flow, almost the exact same flow, works for making purchases online. It's the same general technology that we're using to prove your identity and perform a payment online. We start out with the same basic process. You are in a browser, you go to the seller website, they ask for some kind of proof of credential. So are you cleared to buy this good that you're buying? So for example, if you're buying, let's say, that book, all they would really probably want from you is an email address credential so that they could communicate with you after the fact. But if you're buying, for example, toxic chemicals, or if you were buying a weapon or surgical gear, they might ask you for a license, such as license to practice medicine, license to handle hazardous chemicals. So you would provide those credentials to the seller. And one of the credentials that the seller is going to ask for is who is your payment processor? You know, is your payment processor Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Google Wallet? Is it some third party? Is it a Bitcoin wallet? Who's the payment processor? So all of that can be asked in one go. If you think about today in our buying process online, you have to go to the website and you have to fill out all that information for every website that you visit. There is no standard process for proving certain details about yourself. So the first step usually if you want to buy something online is sign up for an account, verify your email address, right? And then once you've done that, verify that you live in a particular country, verify that you have, a particular type of credit card. We're trying to get rid of all of that so that you just go to a website, you see what you want, you click buy, and the purchase happens. So basically, the seller's got all of your credentials now and is providing what we call an offer for sale. I am selling this book. The seller's going to mark this information up. I am selling this book for 100 Hong Kong dollars or 20 US dollars, or, the offer contains all of the, basically the details of the offer. Licensing information, copyright information, the color of the book, the preface of the book. All of this information is expressed in machine-readable data. Right? We are using a technology called linked data. It's specifically called JSON-LD, and we express all of these credentials and all of these offers in a machine-readable way. And that is important because it allows search engines to come across the website and understand what's for sale on that website and the terms and conditions that those that offer represents. So the browser is going to use the same exact metadata to execute the transaction. They're going to go to you're going to click buy on a particular item in the browser. It's going to create an offer. The browser is then going to take that offer and give it to the payment processor. And the payment processor is going to ask you, you're giving me an offer for a book. It's 100 Hong Kong dollars. Do you want to pay that? Right? This is very different from the current payment process that you do today, right? Normally, you go to the seller and give them your credit card information. They're pulling the money from your bank account. And credit card numbers are incredibly dangerous. It's like giving this merchant a password into your bank account. They can pull whatever they want to out of that account. That's a pull-based payment. What we're talking about here is a push-based payment. You are getting an offer from the seller, and the payment processor is asking you, do you want to push $100 to that seller? And if you say yes, then at that point, the payment processor gives you a digital receipt, which operates very much like a credential. You get the digital receipt, it goes back to your browser, back to the seller. The seller checks the digital signature, it knows that the funds got through, and then it gives you access to the book.
Stop. Now there's a very important difference there between push and pull. Did you catch that? Well, that's great. Oh, question.
The question might come too soon for explanation, but does this mean that if I have like an identifier, like an email address from someone, I can just if I'm a seller, I run an e-commerce business, I can send out 100 pushes and offers to whatever email address I catch?
Sorry, could you clarify a bit?
Can you spam email addresses for money? Is that right?
Already. Instead of spamming people with an email, with a product, I can spam them with an offer and just one click, they actually get everything. The transaction is being made.
No. So there are a number of things that prevent that from happening. One, the offer is opt-in, so you have to actually click on the offer to initiate any kind of purchase process. The second part of that is if you click on that, if you click on this, there's still a chance for you to stop the payment by by going to your payment, but the payment processor is going to ask you, are you sure you want to send this money? And at that point, you can say no. Now, you're right. There's always the danger that people are going to just create random links around the web that make it easy to accidentally trigger these payments. But what we're hoping is that the browser vendors are going to create a special type of button. It's going to be styled in a very specific kind of way, so you know you're initiating a payment.
Sorry, do you want to follow up and then we can move around?
But then again, if I build a browser myself, which is just a crawler that inputs email addresses or accounts and make these calls for everyone, because actually this is applicable for any browser, like in an internet cafe where I've never signed in. I just enter my email address and the browser handles this request, this push to the payment provider, right? So if this browser is some automated spider or crawler, then it can fire off a lot of push requests to the payment provider.
So there's another thing that's protecting that from happening. They need to know some kind of password. They need to know some kind of cryptographic token to do that, to push that. It's right. So we specifically protect against that. We have a remote participant question, and then to the back.
This is great. This is why we're here.
Okay. Timothy Holborn, WebSwix, Australia. You've spoken about how this assists merchants. How does this assist people who may be interested in selling digital goods or information to a website? And he also saying that, say a dating website asks me for credentials. Do I need to use my legal identity? How is person supported? Pseudo anonymity. Can you demonstrate?
Okay, so I guess the general question was, how do we support anonymity in the system if you don't want to use your real identity to purchase something? Maybe, okay.
Let me read and interpret that. I think he was talking about a dating site and using pseudo-anonymous data for a dating site. I'm not sure how that makes it different, but, well,
it might be a general question around anonymity, so I'm just going to take it. Okay. Back there.
Okay. My name is Russell Chadwick. I'm the CEO of InHope. We're 51 hotlines throughout the world that take down child sex abuse material. And we get 1.2 million reports a year that we pass through to law enforcement to be able to investigate paedophilia activity. And the police work with payment providers to be able to track suspected paedophiles. How would this enhance that? Because we do need to be able to track commercial worst of the worst activity onto the internet, and increasingly we see it going through the commercial route. So it's not just paedophiles exchanging images of child abuse, but it's paedophiles selling those. And so how would this help law enforcement track those transactions?
Right, so anonymity and privacy is a big concern of ours, meaning that when you buy something, you might not want to know, you might not want the seller to know who you are, but law enforcement certainly wants some kind of mechanism to discover someone selling illegal substances or child pornography online, either buying or selling, right? So that's an open question here. We want to build in regulatory hooks into this technology. It's a design consideration that we have. So we're giving hooks in here to regulators. So for example, if you do a transaction over $10,000 US in the United States, you have to automatically report that to FinCEN, right? We want to build that into the standard because that's what the regulation basically says you have to do. So there's a question here. Should we allow completely anonymous identity providers? Is that even legal? It depends on which state we're talking about. and that's really why we're here at the IGF. We have certain biases that we bring to the creation of technology, and I really don't think policing of pedophiles or illegal content like that has really been raised as an issue. We talk about it in very high-level terms as far as policing and regulatory stuff. We believe that the identity provider, or at least the payment processor, so the identity provider might hide your identity from everyone else. You might run an identity provider yourself, but the payment processor has to be able to know exactly who you are. There are know your customer regulations in a variety of countries that we have to also be aware of. So I believe the answer to your question is most likely you can do pseudo-anonymous transactions online. Fully anonymous transactions are kind of up in the air because, one, we don't actually know if the technology is capable of doing that. When we say fully anonymous, we mean completely untraceable. We don't know if there's technology to do that. That's a kind of a new thing. And two, if you're talking pseudo-anonymous, we can certainly protect your identity from the seller, but law enforcement is going to probably come down pretty hard on the payment processors and say, you need to know your customer.
So just on a follow-up, if I may. So at the moment, if you have your own car, you have a registration number, a registration plate on that car. So if you break the law, the police can track you because they look up that number and it gives you a good idea who owns that vehicle. So if you're saying that there will be some sort of hook in the system for police to be able to do that, then I think that's acceptable. If you're saying there isn't, you've got to think about the worst of the worst and the activity of the internet that we need to be able to police. Because why would the internet be any different than our normal day-to-day life? You know?
It's precisely the kind of case that you're talking about that made me say, because I do quite a lot of work with child online protection, that we shouldn't include complete anonymity in the standards. I'm saying that people should be allowed to have different identities, because if we go back to the Target case that was mentioned, that was a privacy issue. And it was a failure of the company processing the big data to follow proper data protection standards. But I think you're absolutely right. We shouldn't have complete anonymity, but you can have several identities because you might want different identities to do different things. I mean, I use 2 names and I use lots of different identities, and probably other people who are security and privacy people do that here. But one of the key things when you look at surveys on why people distrust e-commerce, it's because they are frightened of losing their identity and are also frightened of the fact that they don't have redress. And part of redress ultimately is the criminal prosecution, but you also want redress in that you want the consumer laws to protect you from poor goods, from shoddy goods, from non-delivery. So I think it's vital that we don't have anonymity.
Okay, stop. This is great, stop. We've got about 6, 7 questions in the queue, which we'll all get to. What I want to do, this is a role play. So this side, just using this as an example, I want you to now, everyone on this side of the room, consider the optics from the policing side, okay? So you are all on the policing side. You have got a problem that you need to solve, there's been some crime, there's been an incident. You're the police. I want you to use that primary perspective from generating your questions. If you don't want to take that perspective, you can move to the other side of the room. Okay, so this side, you are the ones who have been violated. Okay? It's not cops and robbers, okay, this side. These are the cops, but you're not the robbers. You're the ones who've actually lost private data or are about to lose private data. So through this side, we have one change from the room, Norbert. Your primary optic is to raise questions after the 6 or 7 questions from the view of, hey, where's my personal data, my blood type, my sexual orientation, whatever. And I hope you can generate questions from this perspective. Okay? So with that, I think you were first.
Yeah, my question is, the only part of the transaction that should be controlled and monitored is the legality of the goods and services that are being sold. If the goods and services are legal, why should I, as a buyer, give my data? I mean, besides, the credit card or whatever, but I can keep my anonymity, because provided that the goods and services are legal, there's no reason why I should give any sort of information if I don't want it, besides my payment information.
Okay, but right now in the current model, in the old model, the seller has all that payment information. And furthermore, when you start trading in virtual goods, like not just books, but virtual goods, the shipment has to know where to arrive. So if you're anonymous online, where does that go? So Manu, you want to add anything?
Sure, I believe you're absolutely right. So I think the position of the consensus position of the community group right now is you should not have to give up any private information if it's not necessary for the transaction. And that actually includes things like shipping information. It is possible for you to give the seller a digital receipt saying that payment was made and encrypt the shipping information so that only the shipper can view that. So the seller actually has no idea where they're shipping the information, shipping the good. Now that raises a number of questionable things. Like, for example, if they're shipping a controlled substance and they don't know where they're shipping it to, they should probably not ship it, right? There are corner cases in here that are very important to think about. But in general, no, you should not have to give up any of your private information if all you want to do is, for example, buy a 50-cent addition to a video game online, right?
I would like to bring up the case of a photojournalist in a dangerous place, reporting about war crimes, for example. And so now we want to make sure that a publisher of child abuse pictures gets caught. I would assert we also want to make sure that this photojournalist does not get caught. And one way to do this, I would propose, is to use the credentialing mechanism and have, for example, a credentialing provider. I could assure that this photo is something that is worthy of publication. I guarantee that it is not the kind of thing that violates rights of children. And if I, with my identity, assure this, I'm not the photojournalist, I'm not in the dangerous place, that I think should be enough.
Thank you. Can we move on to an online question from Pakistan? The first question, we have about 6 questions here, but let me just move back to an earlier one. This is Iftikhar from Pakistan. What is the role of the regulatory framework in national e-payments? And who is the key stakeholders? Banks controlling authority, Ministry of Finance, or service provider? Who's in charge?
I think the short answer to that, I mean, we've gone to IGF, we've gone to U.S. Federal Reserve meetings, we've gone to World Wide Web Consortium, and it's not clear right now. I mean, we're in uncharted territory. We're creating a universal payment system for the web. 2.4 billion people could benefit from this technology. This has never been done before. So everyone wants to be involved in the dialogue. That's why we're at IGF. That's why we show up to U.S. Federal Reserve meetings. That's why we've been talking with the European Commission. But I can't. We don't know.
We don't know. Okay. So with that, just want to take a stop. I see you in terms of role of order. On every table there is a yellow sticky note and some pens. If you wish to write your question down, and please do, and I will gather that up. If you want to be anonymous, if we can't get to it in the mic, I'll create a queue, as it were. There was a question at the back.
Thank you, Pinda. I have a couple of questions. I wanted to just make an initial comment. At the moment, when you want to make a transaction, sometimes you've got to jump through all these hoops. And in one way, that's a good thing. You know, when the system that you're proposing is you hand over this digital identification, and I don't know what it is. Is it a number? Is it a serial? Is it a fingerprint? I have no idea yet. If people get hold of that, then it's easier for them to, to start to make transactions with it. But when you go to a website and they ask you for, give us, answer this question, and what's your password, and what's your email address, and can you send through your passport, that makes it a lot more difficult for someone else to come along and steal your identity. So there's benefits with the system now. I don't know how your system is going to get around that.
Right. So the credentialing mechanism, the assumption that we're making here is that we're going to start off with from what cryptographers view as a fairly weak mechanism to protect your identity. So email address, password, and a long password, fairly secure password, right? Everyone's used to doing that today. There are a number of technologies that are coming down the pipeline in the next 1 or 2 years called, it's a group of technologies called two-factor authentication devices. So these are devices that you can basically buy for $2 or $3, and it is a physical token that anyone wanting to steal your identity has to also have that physical token. We have soft token devices today, which are our mobile phones, right? You can type in a PIN number and unlock your credentials that way. These hardware tokens are, the problem with the phone is it can be broken into, and people can steal your identity like that. These hardware tokens are specially designed. The only thing they do is verify that a physical person has access to that hardware token. So in the future, when you go to a website, in order to transmit your credential, you're not only going to need to know your username and password, but you're going to also have to click on that physical token device. You're going to have to say, I have this physical token, and only at that point will your identity provider release that information for transmission elsewhere.
Okay, we have another question from online, if I can just toggle between the two. Timothy Holborn from Australia. How will a user be able to use this technology to define how their information is used beyond the specific needs of carrying out the transaction?
Sorry, repeat the question.
Sorry, the question is, how will a user be able to use this technology to define how their information is used beyond the specific needs of carrying out the transaction?
Right. So this has to do with is the seller able to then retransmit the information to someone else. So for example, if they wanted to sell all your information, if they wanted to sell your government issued ID, if they want to sell marketing data on you, are they allowed to do that? In general, we want to prevent that from happening by putting information in the credential that also covers the use of that credential. So for example, you may only use my government-issued ID to verify my identity on this website. You're not allowed to retransmit it to anyone else. You're not allowed to store it. You're not allowed to derive aggregate data from it. So being able to add that information in the credential itself when it's delivered sets out the rights that the seller has to that data, the rights that you're asserting to the data. And we want to do it in a form where you are effectively executing a contract with the seller when you do that. So when they receive that data, they are in contract with you, and if they violate that contract, you have a legal remedy. That's the hope. We have no language to express that right now. We have no policy input on that. So while we want to do that, we don't have the right people involved to make that a successful process.
So when you buy offline, the store clerk or the store manager know who you are by they see your face, so they understand what age you are, what sex you are, and that kind of helps to feed back into their product, improve their service, and I think that's certain benefit to the society for it. So should transaction online be completely private and not anonymous, and how does your system allow for reasonable data to feed back into data innovation?
Right, so that's a negotiation between the buyer and the seller. If the buyer is okay with, for example, showing their physical image or sharing their date of birth or sharing their gender information with the seller can ask for it and can tag it as, this is an optional thing. I would like to know your gender. I would like to know, X, Y, and Z. And when that request comes through the browser to the identity provider can say, by the way, the seller really needs to know who your payment processor is, but they're also asking information about where you live, your gender, things of that nature. And at that point, you can say, I'm okay with the seller knowing my gender. I don't want them to know my date of birth. I don't want them to know where I live. So the hope is there are ways to optionally ask for information. The seller can say, I must know this information, and can say, I would like to know this other information.
Sorry, just to clarify, are you expecting granular control for each transaction?
Yes, okay. That's the hope.
The data point, yes, granular, and also the change is who's in control. Mm-hmm. Can you explain who's in control?
Right. So we want the person, the person whose data it is. They are in control. They decide when to transmit their information. They decide what rights are associated with that data. They're in control. We do not want to put the seller in control. We do not want to put the identity provider in control of that information.
Okay, we've got six questions in the room and 2 online. So I'm just going to toggle to an earlier question, which is the following. This is the dating website question again, which is, if I'm at a dating website and ask me for credentials, okay, do I need to use my legal identity? And how does Persona support pseudo-anonymous? Can you demonstrate pseudo-anonymity in your example?
Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Just demo pseudo-anonymity.
So pseudo-anonymity is
in a dating application. I'm on a dating site. I want to subscribe to a dating site. Obviously, they want to know who I am, supposedly.
Right.
How can I have pseudo-anonymity?
So maybe a better example on pseudo-anonymity is when you go to, for example, buy alcohol online. This is actually this was actually a shocking statistic to me. In the United States, it used to be that you had your friends buy alcohol if you were underage. Now most teenagers buy their alcohol online because a lot of the websites that sell alcohol are required to check age, but they actually don't do that at all. They just ask you, how old are you? And of course the teenager is going to respond, I'm over the age of 21. All the liquor store, online liquor store really wants is they just want to prove your age and they want payment. That's all they want. So that's a pseudo-anonymous transaction. There are ways of issuing credentials that are just that's just a proof of age. So this is very different from a date of birth. A date of birth specifies exactly which date you were born on. Mm-hmm. A proof of age specifies that you're over the age of 15 or over the age of 18 or over the age of 21. You could be 65 years old, 70 years old, but the only credential that you're sending over is a pseudo-anonymous credential saying I am over the age of 21, I am legally allowed to buy alcohol. So that's hopefully a demonstration of how these credentials can be used to do pseudo-anonymous identification of the person.
Hello, I'm Desiree Zachariah. Going back to verifying credentials, what happens if you lose your hardware token, and how would you go about recovering from that? In addition, and the second part of my question is, are we expecting governments or all governments to buy into the assisting in verifying credentials as well?
What if you lose your hardware token? It's up to the relationship that you have with your identity provider on whether or not you can recover. So there are multiple ways to recover your information if you lose your hardware token. So for example, you can tell your identity provider, if I lose my hardware token, send a special SMS text message to this mobile phone, and that'll give me a recovery password, and I can set up a new hardware token. Or with your identity provider, you can say, I trust these 3 family members to send to be able to reset my hardware token to a new hardware token. But that is completely outside of the standard. It's a value add that an identity provider supports. So an identity provider could support one, they could support both, they could support neither, and people are going to make their decision on whether or not they want to use an identity provider based on features like that. What was the second part of your question again?
Governments.
Government, okay.
Are we expecting governments to buy into this standard? Is that correct?
No. No, we're not. We have specifically designed these technologies so that we do not require buy-in from any government, any technology provider in order for the technologies to be successful. So while the browser is there in the middle, we have implementations of the technology that does not require any browser manufacturer to agree to implement these specifications, right? And that's very important because the browser manufacturers move very, very slowly. They want to see very strong uptake. But what we do have is a way for the browser manufacturers to migrate to this mechanism. So for example, they could add screens to make it more obvious that you're being asked for a credential. They could add elements to the user interface on the browser to make it easier for you to do credential selection and credential authorization. But by design, we do not require any government to buy into this. Now, we want all of the governments to buy into this because it's a standard way of expressing identity. It's a standard way of expressing passport information or citizenship information. But it's really up to the government on whether or not, each specific government to decide whether or not they want to roll their own solution or they want to reuse something that already exists out there. We're hoping they pick this mechanism. We have one question here.
Can we just move from physical space to,
sure.
in fairness to those online? You're next in line. So the online question here, there's several here. What is the importance of awareness in the campaign for online transaction systems for the local community and the standard ways adapted for that awareness? I'm not quite sure what that means. Lady in red.
Hi, I just had a quick question. You've touched on it with respect to IDPs and age attributes. And I'd just like to highlight that again because there are young people under the age of 18 and we need to think about their financial literacy. We need to enable them so when they're transacting and buying transport tickets and stuff and they get eligibility for reduced costs and also they want to buy games and age-related stuff. So I'd just like to put that on the table. Think of those below 18 as well.
Thank you very much. We will do so. Gentleman in the blue.
So one little question. Since you touched on the example with buying alcohol, is it possible through the standard to talk back and forth with the information provider or the payment provider to do several checks? Okay, first check the age and then we can proceed the transaction, or is it going to happen in one step? And a second question to go in more detail with that, if I am an e-commerce provider, I might be very interested in offering a discount for people giving me more optional information. And this means I have to initiate a transaction, but once I get more information, I might give a discount and need to initiate the second transaction. Is this something that's possible through this standard?
Yes, so the credential verification process is separate from the payment process. They can be coupled together, certainly, but you can do what you say, which is a multi-stage purchase. You know, are you over the age of 18? Oh, then I'll show you the form that you have to fill out for, you know, purchasing this.
So are you a student, you get a discount.
Exactly, yep. Yep.
Okay. Why don't you go
I
ahead?
just have a final question, and I think it's already been answered partly, but some more clarification. I've got 13 accounts which belong to me. So when it comes to making a payment, and I put my identification in, how is that identification going to know which account I want to make the payment from?
So you're going to get a selection dialogue that it's a negotiation between the seller and you, right? The seller has a number of different payment mechanisms that they accept. For example, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Bitcoin, right? You may only have, for example, a Bitcoin account and a Visa account. So the browser software is going to say, okay, what's the intersection of these two payment, sets. So there are really only two choices: the credit card and Bitcoin. So the view that you're going to see is, which one do you want? Do you want to pay with your credit card, or do you want to pay with Bitcoin?
But I have like 6 different credit cards.
Then you're going to have the credit card payment mechanism is unified. It doesn't really matter if you have 6 different credit cards. When you select, I want to pay with a credit card, it'll say, okay, which one of these credit cards that you have do you want to pay with, right? So it's a kind of a tree. It's, do you want to pay? It's based on what kind of payment mechanism do you want to use, and then once you select the payment mechanism, it's okay, what are the details associated with that payment mechanism? If you have 3 Bitcoin wallets, which of the 3 Bitcoin wallets do you want to use? If you have 6 credit cards, which one of the credit cards do you want to use?
Stop. At this point, I want us to swap roles. You guys, if you can be the cops, and you guys can be the ones whose personal data has been violated. Just use that from your questions, just for this, because we have last 15 minutes. This is great questions coming, and we have a question from the lady at the back.
I was so ready to be a cop. No, that's okay. I'll move to the other side. My name is Betsy Broder, and I'm with the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. We're a consumer protection enforcement agency. And my question is this. If there is a diffuse set of identity providers, so it's not out of the central bank, it is an independent function, what is the procedure or the oversight to ensure that those entities are acting responsibly in compliance with all regulations and are providing the motherlode of data with appropriate protections?
That's an excellent question. Right now, there is no oversight mechanism that we're looking at. We're hoping that to have a dialogue with folks like the FTC. We're talking to the U.S. Federal Reserve, in the banking sector. But there's nothing stopping, in this system, there's nothing stopping anyone from digitally signing any piece of information and assigning it to someone. Now, it's up to the seller to determine which one of those digital signatures it trusts. So the seller could say, you know what, I only trust Google and Facebook and the U.S. government to authorize, the name of a person, right, or to digitally sign the name of a person. The reason we want to do that is because different countries are going to have, different countries and different merchants in different countries are going to have a different set of needs out of that digital signature, right? So what we absolutely cannot do is create a global whitelist and say, these are the only people that can verify identity in the world. There's no one else. It depends wholly on your community. We want there to be small communities that issue credentials and just use them locally. And in order to enable that to happen, we can't lock it down and say only these government mandated services can be used for identity verification.
Okay, so stop. I'm going to pass around a sign-up sheet. If you don't want to sign, it has name and email address. Just tick the box because we want to know how many people were here. That's just an administrative thing. The online question, which from Pakistan, was how are we creating awareness about this technology?
Coming to IGF, going to the W3C, going to the U.S. Federal Reserve. If any of you would like us to come and speak at your organization or your specific trade group, we'd love to do that. Evangelization of this technology, getting people to understand that it actually is out there. And we're having a vote this month at the World Wide Web Consortium to start the technical work on this, the official technical work on this, right? We had a workshop in Paris earlier this year, and the outcome of the workshop was we believe we can do something about this. And by we, I mean the organizations that were at the workshop were Bloomberg, Microsoft, Google, U.S. Federal Reserve, AT&T, ING Bank, big organizations. So we're trying to get as much awareness as possible in places that are not necessarily technology communities, places like policy and regulatory.
Actually, my question's about the topics we just touched. Could you give a use case example for a case where the payment processor or the identity provider comes from a region with certain types of regulatory rules, and the seller is coming from another country maybe? And let's make it a bit difficult, and I'm living in a separate country and trying to buy something. So could you please give an example for this? For example, in Turkey, buying an alcohol, you have to be over 18. In the States, it's 21. So I'm just trying to understand the...
Sure. Yeah, and that's fantastic. That's a great use case, because we want to make sure that this technology is cross-border, right? Usually what ends up happening is we create our payment systems within the border, and doing a payment outside of the border is very difficult, if not very expensive. So I don't know what alcohol regulations are. I don't know if you can actually ship something from the US to Turkey, but let's assume that you could, right? The first thing that you would have to do is, let's say that you were buying alcohol, from the United States and shipping it to Turkey. You would need, in the US, I'm assuming that their regulation says that you have to be above the age of 21, right? It doesn't matter if you're in the country or out of the country. They're not going to check what the regulations across all the world is. So what they're going to do is they're going to ask for a proof of verification that you're over the age of 21. And hopefully, if you're between the age of 18 and 21, you don't have that. But let's say that you're 22 years old, you can send that credential over along with your shipping address, and that would be enough to clear the payment, clear the regulatory burden on the liquor provider, and then ship that over to Turkey.
Okay. There's not a...
I'm sorry, just a follow-up question. So you said that in order to protect the privacy, I don't want my specific age or date of birth to be transmitted. So will there be how can my payment processor know that in the States, for the States, it has to say if I'm over 21 or not? So maybe this is going into the technical details, but just, it was confusing my mind.
So what you would have to deliver is something from, for example, your government that they gave you that proves that you're over a specific age. So that credential, imagine a piece of paper, and written on that paper is, I certify that the person in control of this piece of paper is over the age of 21. Signed, the government of Turkey, right? So. Yes. Yeah, the query is this person, the query is, give me a credential that proves that this person is over the age of 21. It's given to your identity provider, and the identity provider sends that back.
Right, you got the flow exactly. We didn't have a question online. It was a statement from Pakistan that they're developing payment gateways and would like us to collaborate. So that's that. Number 2 at the back.
And so first, compliments for the session is going really well. I have 2 practical close questions. First is, what's the roadmap planning for this standard, and how are you planning on launching this worldwide? And the second question is, of course, this is a web standard, but I imagine this is a very powerful mechanism. It's also really well applicable to mobile and apps. And how are you planning on allowing this, and are you working together with, for example, Apple and Android to include this in their SDKs?
Right, so fantastic questions. The timeline is last year, let me rewind a bit. Last year at IGF 2013, we raised this topic. We took that into the W3C. They decided we needed to create a web payments workshop. We had that web payments workshop March of this year. Now we're at IGF again, getting information from everyone. We're going to take that information, feed it into W3C TPAC, which happens at the end of October. And the technical working group is going to start thereafter. It usually takes between 3 to 4 years to get a worldwide standard. There are a number of them that we're working on. We're working on credentials, right? So the credentials work, there's a big question mark over it. Should we actually create a technical working group to work on credentials? Many people say no, put that to the side. We say that it is an absolute requirement. If you're going to have high stakes payments, you need high stakes credentials, right? So we're trying to make that case that we need this high stakes credentialing mechanism. The payment initiation and digital receipts, we feel, have a strong support from the W3C. So the votes are happening at the end of this month, and after that we'll know whether or not we have the technical working group. So we're hoping that by the end of 3 to 4 years from now, we'll see stamped approved standards, worldwide standards, but that doesn't mean that we won't see the technology deployed before. It usually happens before. So in 2 to 3 years, we should start seeing this technology deployed.
Yeah. And there's prototype code. You can go and just muck around. You can download it already. You can build on that. So that's the standardization process, but how industry deploys it, as you know, it may happen before then. We have 7 minutes left. This is the last question, if I may, and then I'll sum.
Okay, what would happen with the current payment systems? You know, like credit cards or debit cards, the seller will keep complying with whatever the bank requests, and this is like a new standard coming in. What would happen with PayPal, for instance, or?
It's designed to layer on top, so the entire banking and financial system doesn't need to change at all to adopt this standard. It's another payment option beside PayPal and the banks and the credit cards. Now, PayPal and Google Wallet and the banks could choose to adopt this standard and unify the way that we pay online, but we all know that there are very powerful financial interests in making sure that that doesn't happen. So we are not. We don't think that it is a prudent strategy to assume that the banks are going to want to adopt this immediately, or the credit cards are going to want to adopt this immediately. But we do know that there are a number of banks that want to compete, want to have a better way of interacting with their customer, and using this web payment standard. For example, if you could pay via PayPal or pay via this web payment standard, there's an incentive here for the banks to implement this standard, because if they do it, they own the customer relationship more directly. People won't have to go through PayPal to pay. They could go through, for example, their bank directly to pay. So there's an incentive here for the banks. There's also an incentive for PayPal, making it so that it's easier to pay online. PayPal has a really good brand name. They have very good brand image. So if PayPal implements this, they kind of leapfrog the banks, right? It makes it much easier for you to use PayPal to pay at any venue online.
Yeah, I mean, this brings to a very key point, which is the whole space of financial technology that I alluded to earlier. There are kind of two big camps. You've got the traditional infrastructure guys, primarily the banks, and you've got all the tech companies who are moving into this space. And so who's going to innovate faster, who's going to deploy faster, that's unclear at this point in time. What the global standard will try to do, since we know that there's all these innovations, is try to unify it where it makes sense without killing the innovation and the investment. That's a very fine balance. So thank you for the last question. We have 4 minutes left. You've just participated in the first guinea pig, I guess, case of taking something which is very technical, which has lots of bits flowing. We try to keep the essence of the technology for your input. So what I'd like to do now is go to the last round for the people on our original panel for any final words, starting with Dr. Louise Bennett.
My final plea, I think, from all the things that we've been hearing, is we have a phrase in English called "keep it simple, stupid," and I think that's what we've got to keep on reminding ourselves. We need to keep payment and identity standards simple, so that it's workable, understandable, and it minimizes the chance of things going wrong and allows people to have redress.
Thank you.
Mary?
Thank you. I'd like to make a comment that the range of questions that are emerged today certainly demonstrate the value in bringing this sort of technical conversation to this forum. So thank you very much for your participation. I think your questions will be recorded and dealt with going forward with this initiative. Thank you.
Sorry, Norbert?
I would say okay making it as simple as possible, but please let's not make it simpler, as again the example of the simple mail transport protocol demonstrates that was too simple.
Since Jeremy's not here, again, read his book. A lot of his views are in here. And then Manu, your final words.
Sure, just to say that we're going to have a follow-up lunch. These are my final words. We're going to have a follow-up lunch. If you want to join us upstairs at the restaurant to continue the discussion, please join us. We'd love to kind of keep this discussion rolling. We don't want to just engage here and then leave for a year and come back. We want to continue the conversation with everyone that's been raising fantastic questions throughout the day today.
Right. So on that, where's the sign-up sheet? Is it back at the front? Can I collect that again? Yeah, thank you. Can I collect that? And we have a comment from the gentleman from Pakistan who wants to, we will share our details with him for those of you watching. Online, thank you again for those people online who've been participating. We know there have been some web broadcasting issues. I would love to finish early to make another precedent. So with that, again, we will host a lunch, and please sign up. We're just drawing finally to the post-IGF. Again, it's a 3-stage process. For those of you who didn't watch the videos, which is most of you, please do that. And then a follow-up by completing 2 questionnaires. One, please give us a good ranking in terms of the IGF with their own survey, as well as our own written submissions. This is the start of a dialogue, and we look forward to keeping in touch with you for those of you who wish to do so. And thank you very much.